Welcome back, YouTube, and thanks for tuning in to Comic Statues Unleashed, your go to source for all things related to large scale premium collectibles and comics. Today, we're tackling a unique project that I think will really enhance the way I display my dark metal Batman portraits. If you've caught my last video, you'll remember that Prime 1 only included one bust stand for the 5 portraits. And if you're like me, you want each piece in your collection to stand out. So naturally, I realized that having each portrait on its own custom stand would give them the attention they deserve. So sit back as we go from one bust to multiple busts. And I know you're already thinking, I'm sure Comic Statues has researched how to do this and probably has experience as well as him being a master painter. Or maybe he has a professional grade 3D printer and years of artistic experience.
Wrong. Wrong.
So sit back and enjoy as we delve into this hard-hitting expose on ripping off Prime 1 Studios. Legal disclaimer, this video is for educational and commentary purposes only. I have no idea if this violates any type of copyright.
Right to jail, right away.
And after this video, all of these will be destroyed and most definitely not be enjoyed forever as part of my own personal collection. Check local laws. Now, let's get into it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any upcoming statue reviews, unboxings, and deep dives into the world of collectible art. So let's get into it. First, I'll walk you through the materials and tools I'm using for this cloning process. To recreate the original bust stand, I've got casting silicone, resin for the molding, some sandpaper for refining the surface, and a few paints to match the stand's unique finish. If you're considering a similar project, these materials are easy to find and relatively affordable. The first step is creating a mold from the original bust stand. I'm carefully applying silicone to capture every little detail, from the edges down to the subtle textures. This process can take a little time, but trust me, patience pays off here if you want to capture the most accurate replica possible. The kit I'm using is straight off of Amazon and was perfect. Next, I needed an appropriate plastic container. My wife's bathroom garbage worked very well, but the bust was too large, so I had to chop off the bottom. Now, for a quick test fit to see how it lines up. Fits well, but a lot of empty negative space surrounding it that will require loads of silicone to fill. I will be utilizing some filler pieces to take up the empty negative space and hopefully displacing as much needed silicone as possible. Preparation leads to success, so here I am preparing the base to secure the stand and container to. I covered it in a foil tape as well as scotch tape to prevent leakage as well as the silicone soaking through the base. I also hoped to prevent the mold from sticking to the base once it had fully solidified.
You sure about that?
Just a super fast behind the scenes shot of my makeshift workshop and studio. Here I am, preparing the mold with negative space fillers. I used sections of a cut up piece of 2x4, effectively filling up the dead space and displacing the need for additional silicone. After finalizing the positions, I surrounded the pieces in hot glue as well to prevent the silicone liquid from getting behind and displacing the wood itself. As you can see, once everything was said and done, it made for quite a tight and snug fit around this bust stand, accomplishing what I was after. Now that I made it this far, it was a good time as any to finally get around to reading those pesky instructions and determining how I was going to do this. Step 1 was simple enough: calculate and measure out the exact amount you need in order to fill the mold. Step 2, realize you can't calculate it and have no idea what you're doing, so you completely skip step 1 and go full send, only to immediately spill out half of your supply. Step 3, clean up and continue. Once measured out, you then combine equal parts of the polymer and activator and mix vigorously until completely unified into one consistent color. Finally, I've come to the point of no return. I started covering my irreplaceable bus stand with this magic wizard paste in hopes that I could actually accomplish what I set out to do. Then I realized I grossly underestimated how much silicone I needed and made an additional batch immediately to cover it adequately. I ended up mixing my entire supply in hopes of it being enough. Thank goodness I had used the negative filler pieces. In hindsight, I probably could have measured out the amount of water needed and planned accordingly. Pouring out the remaining amount I had into the container and realizing it still is not enough. It left a good portion of the tip uncovered, and I began to think if I actually needed to cover the tip at all.
The tip is my favorite part, Smith. The tip's all I need. Any more than that, and it's too much!
With no silicone left, I did the next most reasonable thing and frantically began ramming things into it to displace more liquid and cover the stand. Surprisingly enough, it actually worked. And despite the excessive gluing down of the statue and container to the stand, there were still some minor leaks. Thankfully, the leaks were no match for a buttload of hot glue, and I fixed it immediately. Here's a picture with my finger next to it, just so you get some scale of how much glue is actually applied there. Easily a couple stick worths.
5 hours later.
Literally, a few hours later, the silicone had hardened completely. According to the instructions, you could demold it now, but I chose to wait a full 24 hours. Also, while waiting, I realized the instructions had continued onto the back of the pamphlet. Silicone can damage paint and resin objects, so you should test it out beforehand. Oh well, too late for that now. Especially sensitive are 3D printed polymers. Just a little information for you there in case you want to try something like this. The next morning, I began the demolding process by removing the glue from the stand and delaminating it from the base. Here's a quick little glimpse of what the mold and silicone looks like just prior to the glue being removed, so you see how hard it is. The first thing to do was crack off the glue holding everything down and together. Surprisingly, this step was not as easy as you would have thought, but it still came off perfectly intact and clean. The next step involves cleaning up the undercarriage. The footrests of the stand elevated it just a few millimeters, so the silicone formed a complete encompassing shield around the entire unit. Slow and steady, and it came right off without any damage to the stand. If you thought this was arduous, wait until the next clip of the container removal video. Hindsight vision again here, but a mold releasing agent used beforehand probably would have helped, and not gluing the wood to the container too, as that acted as anchors for the mold. Okay, this portion was a pain. I originally had plans to crack the container down the center and reuse it as a brace for the mold, but it became apparent forthwith that it would be impossible to remove intact. The executive decision was made to destroy the container as quickly as possible while trying not to cut myself. I simply pried it open and bit by bit removed the damaged container pieces. As I progressed and I removed each subsequent piece, I could see that the mold was coming out very well, and I was pleased with the result thus far.
5 hours later.
Finally, after all that work, this Frankenstein-esque piece of blob was freed and ready to be used. Now, to begin cutting it open while maintaining the integrity of the mold so I could use it for casting. I didn't want to destroy it or cause any internal damage to it. Here, I took my meticulous time and inched my way down, carving into this blob. Just have to open it enough to get the stand out. Upon the release, I was admiring it and checking for damage. Thankfully, it was all good and unwavered. Immediately after the release, I taped up the mold and put it in a container. Then I prepared the substrate to use and test out the mold. I prepared the plaster of Paris to try it out and thought I had made enough, but no, history has repeated itself once again and I was short. So another frantic batch was prepared and used. Of course, I tapped down the bucket to remove air and oscillated into every crevice. I also pushed it down. I decided to start with plaster of Paris to test out the detail in the mold. Also, plaster of Paris dries relatively fast and is super inexpensive. After an hour, it was completely solidified and ready to demold. The casting was still warm from the exothermic reaction. I literally had no idea how this was going to turn out and was highly skeptical of it working in the first place since I had never actually tried anything like this beforehand. It wasn't until I cracked it open that I realized how good it looked and how incredibly detailed the silicone mold actually was. The casting was an exact copy. But sometimes the universe aligns and things just work out in your favor.
Were it not for the girl's father bursting in at the last moment, I'd be a sex offender right now.
Here I am, simply running through the motions and grinding it out. As soon as a fresh bust was done and demolded, I would simply turn around, recast, and start another one. I continued this process to try to get as many done as quickly as possible throughout the day. After an hour, I would open it up, see how it came out, and double check everything. I would simply clean out the casting mold and refill it to start again. After I had a couple made, I started to line them up. Here it is next to the original. Then I started to apply primer and begin the painting process on all of them. I purposely went out of my way to make sure each one was unique and individualized. Here I am experimenting with paint application, and I know I don't have an airbrush just yet, but hey, it's a first attempt. I know you're all laughing at my painting skills and the fact that I'm using an actual brush.
One that hurts my feelings.
As a safety precaution, I drilled out and inserted a strong magnet to help hold the portraits in place. These magnets were purchased off Amazon and are very strong, but you do need to properly be secured. Here is a view of the first batch semi-painted and highlighted. Not fully sanded or anything like that yet, but a good progressive shot of all of them so far. Afterwards, I realized I wanted to utilize some of these with other statues I have, namely my Reverse Red Death and Grim Knight. Both are also Batman variants and 1/3 scale with additional portraits, but no bust stands. So I went about applying, measuring, and modifying the stance with sculpting epoxy until I was happy with it and was able to use both additional portraits with each. And after all that, here they are surrounding the piece itself. A great first attempt and super pleased with the results. I was even able to angle one portrait upwards in a more straight on viewpoint. Well, that wraps up today's review. What do you think of Death Metal Batman rip-off bust stands? Is it bootleg enough for your collection? I hope all 8 of you out there watching are enjoying it. Let me know in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming reviews here on Comic Statues Unleashed. Until we meet again, keep your passion for collecting alive and your love for superheroes soaring.